Let's get this started. Got a couple of interesting things to chat with you all tonight. I'll give a minute for people to start rolling in here to the chat. Let me know that you're watching by dropping me something in the chat there. We're going to talk about a few different things. Obviously, right now there's a big conference going on at the World Economic Forum, a gathering of what many people see as political elites from around the world, sort of a meeting of the minds where you can get an idea of what some of the world's leaders are thinking in terms of the way that we interact with each other as different countries. And some people sort of see them as the enemy. A lot of people do, saying, okay, well, this is a group of people trying to control the world, and people have takes anywhere in the middle on that. One interesting thing that has gone on is there was a new addition to this crew, someone who had never been here before, and that's Argentinian President Javier Milei. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, and well, he's got a speech that is going pretty viral. I haven't watched it yet. This is going to be a live reaction from me. I wonder if you've checked it out. Apparently there's some pretty interesting stuff in here, and some stuff that a lot of people are surprised they let him say at the World Economic Forum, where he's kind of talking against all of the points that they are largely pushing. So that's going to be interesting. Good to see you, Kevin, in the chat, and Mike. Awesome to have people here tuning in. So we're going to get into this pretty quickly because I think it's going to be rather interesting. And like all of these streams that we do on the channel, it's a good opportunity for me to get to know you a little bit better, right? My videos are pretty scripted and pretty honed in and edited. This situation is where you kind of get to know me a little bit better, and I get to know you a little bit better by when you interact with the chat. And I believe I can pop it up here, and you should be able to see the chat right there. Beautiful. Now we're set. Now let's take a look at what's going on here. Again, live reaction. I haven't heard this before. I wonder if you have. Let me know what you think. Good to see you, Felicia and Daria. Let's dive right into this, and I think we're gonna have a fair amount to talk about here tonight.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Today, I'm here to tell you that the Western world is in danger. And it is endangered because those who are supposed to have to defend the values of the West are co-opted by a vision of the world that inexorably leads to socialism and thereby to poverty.
Let me give you a little bit of context. Of course, this is the newly elected Argentinian president, who is very anti-socialist, right? He's done a lot of cutting of government programs, government sectors, a large reduction in spending by the Argentinian government, very controversial economic policy he's implemented, sort of ditching the peg for their currency in Argentina. So it's going to be interesting here because it's very contradictory to a lot of the other stuff that's been going on. Good to see you, Dr. Toteg, Pamela, Lord Kiltridge, Eric. Good to see you all here. Let's dive back in.
Fortunately, in recent decades, motivated by some well-meaning individuals willing to help others, and others motivated by the wish to belong to a privileged caste, the main leaders of the Western world have abandoned the model of freedom for different versions of what we call collectivism. We're here to tell you that collectivist experiments are never the solution to the problems that afflict the citizens of the world. Rather, they are the root cause. Do believe me, no one better placed than us, Argentines, to testify to these 2 points. When we adopted the model of freedom back in 1860, in 35 years we became a leading world power. And when we embraced collectivism over the course of the last 100 years, we saw how our citizens started to become systematically impoverished, and we dropped to spot number 140 globally. But before having the discussion, it would first be important for us to take a look at the data that demonstrate why free enterprise capitalism is not just the only possible system to end world poverty, but also that it's the only morally desirable system to achieve this. If we look at the history of economic progress, we can see how between the year 0 and the year 1800 approximately, world per capita GDP practically remained constant throughout the whole reference period. If you look at a graph of the evolution of economic growth throughout the history of humanity, you would see a hockey stick graph, an exponential function that remained constant for 90% of the time and which was exponentially triggered starting in the 19th century. The only exception to this history of stagnation was in the late 15th century with the discovery of the American continent. But for this exception, throughout the whole period between the year 0 and the year 1800, global per capita GDP stagnated. Now, it's not just that capitalism brought about an explosion in wealth from the moment it was adopted as an economic system. But also, if you look at the data, what you will see is that growth continues to accelerate throughout the whole period. And throughout the whole period between the year 0 and the year 1800, the per capita GDP growth rate remained stable at around 0.02% annually, so almost no growth. Starting in the 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution, the compound annual growth rate was 0.66%. And at that rate, in order to double per capita GDP, you would need some 107 years. Now, if you look at the period between the year 1900 and the year 1950, the growth rate accelerated to 1.66% a year. So you no longer need 107 years to double per capita GDP, but 66. And if you take the period between 1950 and the year 2000, you will see that the growth rate was 2.1%. Again, the CAGR, which would mean that in only 33 years we could double the world's per capita GDP. This
Okay, so he's already sort of talking my language. You'll know if you watch any of the videos on this channel that one of the things that we look at is GDP per capita, right? The measure of a country's economic success. I don't think should be tied to the large number GDP, like the total across the country, but more should be considered, okay, what are we doing for the quality of life of average Canadians, which a lot of people agree GDP per capita is a pretty close measure for that. Instead of measuring the whole economic output, measure it on a per person basis, because that gives you a better idea of how individual people are faring. There's tons of situations where you can see GDP increase for an entire country, while the GDP, when it's split up between all the people in that country, actually declines, resulting in a poorer quality of life, right? So he's addressing that right from the start, saying, okay, for a long, long time, there was not any growth for GDP per capita. Then we started seeing, well, some consistent GDP per capita growth around 2%. So I'm curious what he's going to say next here. If you're tuning into the channel live right now, drop me a comment in the chat. It's great to see you in there, and hit the like button if you can. Good to see you, Mike and D&B and Happy Go Lucky, Daniel, K-Crew, Glenn, Tigsty, Heyo. Good to see you. This is Tristan. Awesome. Let's dive in.
This trend, far from stopping, remains well alive today. If we take the period between the year 2000 and 2023, the growth rate again accelerated to 3% a year, which means that we could double world per capita GDP in just 23 years. That said, when you look at per capita GDP since the year 1800 and until today, what you will see is that after the Industrial Revolution, global per capita GDP multiplied by over 15 times, which meant a boom in growth that lifted 90% of the global population out of poverty. We should remember that by the year 1800, about 95% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty, and that figure dropped to 5% by the year 2020, prior to the pandemic. The conclusion is obvious. Far from being the cause of our problems, free trade capitalism as an economic system it's the only instrument we have to end hunger, poverty, and extreme poverty across our planet. The empirical evidence is unquestionable. Therefore, since there is no doubt that free enterprise capitalism is superior in productive terms, the left-wing doxa has attacked capitalism, alleging matters of morality, saying,
very interesting, right? He at this conference of a lot of people who think very differently than him is just laying out his beliefs, right? I think a lot of people might push back on saying on like whether or not that was enough evidence on his end to say, okay, free market capitalism is the only way 100% because we saw all this growth sort of kicked off by the Industrial Revolution and a number of other things, right? So maybe that's enough of an argument for some people. Maybe some people won't be convinced, but either way, it's interesting to talk about. Good to see you, Gratitude, and Mike, and CJM, and Kartik. Good to see you.
That's what the detractors claim, that it's unjust. They say that capitalism is evil because it's individualistic, and that collectivism is good because it's altruistic, of course, with the money of others. So they therefore advocate for social justice. But this concept, which in the developed world became fashionable in recent times, in my country has been a constant in political discourse for over 80 years. The problem is that social justice is not just, and it doesn't contribute either to the general well-being. Quite on the contrary, it's an intrinsically unfair idea because it's violent. It's unjust because the state is financed through tax. And taxes are collected coercively. Or can any one of us say that they voluntarily pay taxes? Which means that the state is financed through coercion, and that the higher the tax burden, the higher the coercion, and the lower the freedom. Those who promote social justice, the advocates, start with the idea that the whole economy is a pie that can be shared differently. But that pie is not a given. It's wealth that is generated in what Israel Kirzner, for instance, calls a market discovery process. If the goods or services offered by a business are not wanted, the business will fail unless it adapts to what the market is demanding. If they make a good quality product at an attractive price, they will do well and produce more. So the market is a discovery process in which the capitalists will find the right path as they move forward. But if the state punishes capitalists when they're successful and gets in the way of the discovery process, they will destroy their incentives, and the consequence is that they will produce less, the pie will be smaller, and this will harm society as a whole. Collectivism, by inhibiting these discovery processes and hindering the appropriation of discoveries, ends up binding the hands of entrepreneurs and prevents them from offering better goods and services at a better price. So how come that academia, international organizations, economic theory, and politics demonize an economic system that has not only lifted out of extreme poverty 90% of the world's population, but has continued to do this faster and faster? And this is
Okay, so to summarize his argument so far, he's saying, okay, we saw very low growth in GDP per capita for a very long time. Then something happened, and we started to see all of this growth, and we were able to more quickly double the GDP per capita, average quality of life. We're sort of using those in parallel to sort of mean the same thing, quality of life versus GDP per capita. It's the closest measure. He's saying, hey, we need to focus on that. But he says, okay, well, capitalism is what has done all of this, right? That's what he's saying. He's saying capitalism is the reason we've been more productive. And he's saying that many of the people here at the World Economic Forum and their ideas of sort of intervening in markets results in undue burdens on people who are trying to make money, right? People who are trying to make money, start businesses, be productive, and grow the pie for everybody, right? That's the idea. Now, we'll get into my thoughts on a lot of this. Like, I don't think that pure free market capitalism is the way to go. I think ultimately that leads to centralization of power in big business, right? I think that there does need to be some sort of balance between government and free market capitalism, and government being able to regulate in appropriate ways different businesses so that they don't become monopolistic and sort of crowd out the market. But we'll get more into that in a second. It's interesting where he's going so far, at the very least.
Morally superior and just. Thanks to free trade capitalism, it is to be seen that the world is now living its best moment. Never in all of mankind's or humanity's history has there been a time of more prosperity than today. This is true for all. The world of today has more freedom, is rich, is more peaceful and prosperous. And this is particularly true for countries that have more freedom and have economic freedom and respect the property rights of individuals, because countries that have more freedom are 12 times richer than those that are repressed, and the lowest decile in terms of distribution in free countries are better off than 90% of the population of repressed countries, and poverty is 25 times lower, and extreme poverty is 50 times lower. And citizens in free countries live 25% longer than citizens in repressed countries. Now, what is it that we mean when we talk about libertarianism? And let me quote the words of the greatest authority on freedom in Argentina, Professor Alberto Venegas Lech Jr., who says that libertarianism is the unrestricted respect for the life project of others, based on the principle of non-aggression, in defense of the right to life, liberty and property. Its fundamental institutions being private property, markets free from state intervention, free competition, the division of labor, and social cooperation, as part of which success is achieved only by serving others with goods of better quality or at a better price. In other words, capitalists, successful business people are social benefactors who, far from appropriating the wealth of others, contribute to the general well-being. Ultimately, a successful entrepreneur is a hero. And this is the model that we are advocating for the Argentina of the future, a model based on the fundamental principles of libertarianism, the defense of life, of freedom, and of property. Now, if free enterprise capitalism and economic freedom have proven to be extraordinary instruments to end poverty in the world, and we are now at the best time in the history of humanity, it is worth asking why I say that the West is endangered. And I say this precisely because in those of our countries that should defend the values of the free market, private property, and the other institutions of libertarianism, sectors of the political and economic establishment, some due to mistakes in their theoretical framework and others due to a greed for power, are undermining the foundations of libertarianism, opening up the doors to socialism and potentially condemning us to poverty, misery and stagnation. It should never be forgotten that socialism is always and everywhere an impoverishing phenomenon that has failed in all countries where it's been tried out. It's been a failure economically, socially, culturally, and it also murdered over 100 million human beings. The essential problem in the West today is not just that we need to come to grips with those who, even after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the overwhelming empirical evidence, continue to advocate for impoverishing socialism. But there's also our own leaders, thinkers, and academics who, relying on a misguided theoretical framework, undermine the fundamentals of the system that has given us the greatest expansion of wealth and prosperity in our history. The theoretical framework to which I refer.
Yeah, this is interesting. I see a comment in the chat there, one from Mark H saying, all I see is another rich guy blowing smoke up our asses. I think that might be the take from a lot of people. I think many people are going to agree with what he's saying, but I could understand how these words sort of fall flat on people struggling to get by. Like, is this just a justification for entrepreneurs to make way more money than other people and exploit workers? And like, maybe that's the counter argument, right? Like, I like to always like try to figure out what I think about things by trying to see if I can argue the other side. I think that's a healthy thing to do, and I can see where people are coming from. Like, it's a lot of economic jargon, and it makes it sound like, okay, maybe you're just trying to make regulations that make rich people richer, right? That's I think the counter argument. I think his argument is, though, like, if we can really economically reward people who start businesses, who do things in the economy, right, go out and actually make things happen, well, maybe that financial reward will result in more people doing that, creating more jobs, creating more wealth across the country.
Is that of neoclassical economic theory, which designs a set of instruments that unwillingly or without meaning to ends up serving the intervention by the state, socialism and social degradation. The problem with neoclassicals is that the model they fell in love with does not map reality, so they put down their mistakes to supposed market failures rather than reviewing the premises of the model. On the pretext of a supposed market failure, regulations are introduced which only create distortions in the price system, prevent economic calculus, and therefore also prevent saving, investment and growth. This problem lies mainly in the fact that not even supposedly libertarian economists understand what the market is, because if they did understand, it would quickly be seen that it's impossible for there to be something along the lines of market failures. The market is not a mere graph describing a curve of supply and demand. The market is a mechanism for social cooperation where you voluntarily exchange ownership rights. Therefore, based on this definition, talking about a market failure is an oxymoron. There are no market failures. If transactions are voluntary, the only context in which there can be a market failure is if there is coercion. And the only one that is able to coerce generally is the state, which holds a monopoly on violence. Consequently, if someone considers that there is a market failure, I would suggest that they check to see if the state intervention involved. And if they find that that's not the case, I would suggest that they check again, because obviously there's a mistake. Market failures do not exist. An example of these so-called market failures described by the neoclassicals are the concentrated structures of the economy. However, without increasing returns to scale functions, whose counterpart are the concentrated structures of the economy, we couldn't possibly explain economic growth since the year 1800 until today. Isn't this interesting? Since the year 1800 onwards, with population multiplying by 8 or 9 times, per capita GDP grown by over 15 times. So there are growing returns, which took extreme poverty from 95% to 5%. However, the presence of growing returns involves concentrated structures, what we would call a monopoly. How come then that something that has generated so much well-being for the neoclassical theory is a market failure? Neoclassical economists think outside of the box. When the model fails, you shouldn't get angry with reality, but rather with the model and change it. The dilemma faced by the neoclassical model is that they say they wish to perfect the functioning of the market by attacking what they consider to be failures. But in so doing, they don't just open up the doors to socialism, but also go against economic growth. An example, regulating monopolies, destroying their profits and destroying growing returns automatically would destroy economic growth. In other words, whenever you want to correct a supposed market failure inexorably, as a result of not knowing what the market is, or as a result of having fallen in love with a failed model, you are opening up the doors to socialism and condemning people to poverty. However,
that's an interesting point. He says, okay, a true monopoly, this is what I'm taking away from it. He says that true monopoly isn't a market failure. This sort of goes against what I was just saying is one of my beliefs, is that, like, okay, we need a level of government to make sure that in a free market capitalist society that these companies don't become monopolies and capture the market so that no competitors can compete with them, forcing them to improve their products or lower their prices, which is ideal for consumers, right? I think what he's saying is that doesn't happen if you have a pure free market economy, saying that, okay, the only way that these monopolies happen is if the government gets involved and regulates sort of what's a good way to say this? Regulates like it's almost like walking through the door and then closing it behind you. Like regulates these companies in a way that it's too hard to follow those rules for new upstart companies, essentially enshrining the monopolies that are already there. Yeah, a moat. That Carlo, that's exactly right. Like putting in a moat so that new companies can't compete against them. I wonder, like, I think maybe private companies, even without government, might be able to do that just through pure ability to like invest in their products. Like it could run away just like a and sort of amplify over time. I could see that still running away even if government wasn't involved. But I'd like definitely look at it today in Canada. We have these oligarchies almost where the big business, especially like the big telecoms. I think of that. I also think of the big grocers. Is like, where's the competition, right? We're funding infrastructure, like giving billions of dollars to Bell and Rogers so that they can set up all of our 5G infrastructure and our fiber optic internet connections, and we're giving them billions of dollars to do that, but now they're the only ones that have that infrastructure, and it sets them so that, hey, we're the only ones that can provide this service, so even if other people were able to lay all this wire, if they weren't subsidized by the government, well, we would still be the only ones that you could go with. We're getting all of this government funding, right? So maybe it's more a product of governments creating those moats than those moats popping up from just a pure market capitalist economy. I don't know what the right answer is there, but yeah, that's kind of how I think, is that you do need a balance of government to stop monopolies from happening, but too much government involvement can result in more monopolies. Does that make any sense?
Faced with the theoretical demonstration that state intervention is harmful and the empirical evidence that it has failed couldn't have been otherwise, the solution to be proposed by collectivists is not greater freedom, but rather greater regulation, which creates a downward spiral of regulations until we're all poorer and the life of all of us depends on a bureaucrat sitting in a luxury office. Given the dismal failure of collectivist models and the undeniable advances in the free world, socialists were forced to change their agenda. They left behind the class struggle based on the economic system and replaced this with other supposed social conflicts which are just as harmful to life as a community and to economic growth. The first of these new battles was the ridiculous and unnatural fight between man and woman. Libertarianism already provides for equality of these sexes. The cornerstone of our creed says that all humans are created equal, that we all have the same unalienable rights granted by the Creator, including life, freedom, and ownership. All that this radical feminism agenda has led to is greater state intervention to hinder the economic process, giving a job to bureaucrats who have not contributed anything to society. Examples, ministries of women or international organizations devoted to promoting this agenda. Another conflict presented by socialists is that of humans against nature, claiming that we human beings damage the planet, which should be protected at all costs, even going as far as advocating for population control mechanisms or the bloody abortion agenda. Unfortunately, these harmful ideas have taken a strong hold in our society. Neo-Marxists have managed to co-opt the common sense of the Western world, and this they have achieved by appropriating the media, culture, universities, and also international organizations. The latter case is the most serious one, probably, because these are institutions that have enormous influence on political and economic decisions of the countries that make up the multilateral organizations. Fortunately, there's more and more of us who are daring to make our voices heard, because we see that if we don't truly and decisively fight against these ideas, the only possible fate is for us to have increasing levels of state regulation, socialism, poverty, and less freedom, and therefore will be having worse standards of living. The West has unfortunately already started to go along this path. I know to many it may sound ridiculous to suggest that the West has turned to socialism, but it's only ridiculous if you only limit yourself to the traditional economic definition of socialism, which says that it's an economic system where the state owns the means of production. This definition, in my view, should be updated in the light of current circumstances. Today, states don't need to directly control the means of production to control every aspect of the lives of individuals. With tools such as printing money, debt, subsidies, controlling the interest rate, price controls, and regulations to correct the so-called market failures, they can control the lives and fates of millions of individuals. This is how...
There's something that resonates with me. There is something that resonates with me. It was talking about... Let's re-listen to that just once more, because that's what I spend a lot of time thinking about these days is, central bank control and how unelected people have so much control over our lives based on their decisions. I want to re-listen to just that last section.
Ridiculous if you only limit yourself to the traditional economic definition of socialism, which says that it's an economic system where the state owns the means of production. This definition, in my view, should be updated in the light of current circumstances. Today, states don't need to directly control the means of production to control every aspect of the lives of individuals. With tools such as printing money, debt, subsidies, controlling the interest rate, price controls, and regulations to correct the so-called market failures, they can control the lives and fates of millions.
That's interesting, the way he puts it. He's saying, okay, well, he says obviously hates socialism, this guy, says that is the problem. And he says many people would say, okay, we're not socialist in the West right now. But he says that's only if you go by the traditional definition. By not going with the traditional definition, we can get there and call it socialist. He says that it is in essence socialist, even though you don't own all of these companies. It's not fully nationalized, all of these corporations. Even though that's the case, you still have some sort of macro control over what they do, how much they expand, as well as like all of the lives of people in these countries, right? You look at Canada, you look at America, the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve largely control monetary policy, right? Which impacts everything, right? Impacts interest rates. They essentially decide what they want interest rates to be based on their point of view of the economy. They decide how to respond in black swan events like the pandemic, something that I think that a lot of people would be frustrated with if maybe 50 years from now, looking back on the textbooks for how COVID was handled by central banks, right? I think it stopped us from having a major recession. Sure, all the money printing, quantitative easing, but at the same time, it enriched already wealthy people. What happens when you add a whole shit ton more money into the economy? Of course, the things that are denominated in that currency are going to go up in value because the value of that currency goes down, right? Add more money to the system, each individual dollar in value terms is worth less. That's why we saw stocks absolutely rip during the pandemic. That's why we saw real estate absolutely rip during the pandemic. Hell, that's why we saw cryptocurrency rip during the pandemic, is low for long interest rates paired with money printing is going to change the denominator on the fraction, right? This is something that I get passionate about because I think that maybe those central banks made the right decision to not drive us into a recession, but at the same time, look at all these impacts, many of which made the poorer poorer and the rich richer. So who's the ones that get to decide this sort of thing? Not elected officials, and that's something I'm frustrated with. I wonder if he gets in more into that.
Of individuals. This is how we come to the point where, by using different names or guises, a good deal of the generally accepted political offers in most Western countries are collectivist variants, whether they proclaim to be openly communists, fascists, Nazis, socialists, social democrats, national socialists, Democrat Christians, Christian Democrats, neo-Keynesians, progressive, populist, nationalists, or globalists. At bottom, there are no major differences. They all say that the state should steer all aspects of the lives of individuals. They all defend a model contrary to that one which led humanity to the most spectacular progress in its history. We have come here today to invite the rest of the countries in the Western world to get back on the path of prosperity, economic freedom, limited government, and unlimited respect for private property are essential elements for economic growth. And the impoverishment produced by collectivism is no fantasy, nor is it an inescapable fate. But it's a reality that we Argentines know very well. We have lived through this, we have been through this, because as I said earlier, ever since we decided to abandon the model of freedom that had made us rich, we have been caught up in a downward spiral, as part of which we are poorer and poorer day by day. So this is something we have lived through, and we are here to warn you about what can happen if the countries in the Western world that became rich through the model of freedom stay on this path of servitude. The case of Argentina is an empirical demonstration that no matter how rich you may be, or how much you may have in terms of natural resources, or how skilled your population may be, or educated, or how many bars of gold you may have in the central bank, if measures are adopted that hinder the free functioning of markets, free competition, free price systems, if you hinder trade, if you attack private property, the only possible fate is poverty.
Speaking of attacking private property, right? That makes me think of the response to the trucker protests, right? The convoy in Ottawa, and the rather drastic measure to actually seize funds from people's bank accounts who were involved with that protest. Think what you will about the protest itself. I think that move of invoking the War Measures Act in Canada was a big deal and a big mistake in terms of precedent setting, right? Like, even if you agreed that people needed to be removed from that situation, and that particular protest was wrong and shouldn't have been going on and was an undue nuisance, sure, I'll give you that if you want to think that, sure. But I don't understand how anyone can believe that invoking the War Measures Act to draw funds out and freeze people's bank accounts is at all a proper response to the situation, right? Because even if you agree that it was warranted in this situation, well, what's to say that a government you don't agree with doesn't misuse that power in the future when you're protesting for a cause that you care about, right? You can't just think individually on these issues. And he says here, okay, not respecting private property, which, like, of course we can think of this as like houses or maybe your physical possessions, but I also include in that wrap up your dollars, right? Which ultimately your money is your greatest freedom. It is your greatest freedom. What can you say without your money, right? You can't speak with your wallet in terms of the products and things that you want. You don't have freedom to travel. How are you going to get around if you don't have access to your funds? I think that that's the ultimate sort of a gateway into the rest of the freedoms. So if a government is willing to not respect private property like that, I think it's a concerning bellwether for what could be to come.
Therefore, in concluding, I would like to leave a message for all business people here and for those who are not here in person but are following from around the world. Do not be intimidated either by the political class or by parasites who live off the state. Do not surrender to a political class that only wants to stay in power and retain its privileges. You are social benefactors. You're heroes. You're the creators of the most extraordinary period of prosperity we've ever seen. Let no one tell you that your ambition is immoral. If you make money, it's because you offer a better product at a better price, thereby contributing to general well-being. Do not surrender to the advance of the state. The state is not the solution. The state is the problem itself. You are the true protagonists of this story. And rest assured that as from today, Argentina is your staunch, unconditional ally. Thank you very much, and long live freedom. Damn it.
Wow, haven't heard a speech like that coming out of Davos before. Yeah, I wonder if he'll be invited back. I think that there's more and more politicians across the world that are kind of starting to go in this direction. It seems like a response to, like, I think everything in life is a big pendulum, right? You go too far in one direction, and then people start to catch on and start to be against it, and then maybe you swing too far in the other direction, eventually over time, and hopefully over time you get to some sort of happy medium there. But interesting to see this direction, right? Some people may call it a more Trumpist, maybe, like kind of like Donald Trump, but obviously packaged very differently, right? I think Donald Trump was poised for getting a ton of attention, and that's what helped him become the leader of the free world. But I don't think that his economic policy was as refined and that he was as clear a talker as Milei from Argentina. So that's pretty interesting. I'm curious what you think about it. Let me know in the chat. I got a couple other things I want to go over here in a second. Let me go back to full cam and bring up chat here. You should be able to see yourselves there. Good to see you all, by the way, tuning in. We've got Happy Go Lucky, Lord, Sunshine, Thunderduck, Bane, Eric, CC, Getting Cereal. What a username. That's a good one. Polarism is a nice sentiment, but I'm not so sure it is a universal. Yeah, who knows? Maybe the pendulum doesn't ever swing back, but that's pretty wild. Here are some reactions to this speech. That was the first time I watched it. I just wanted to check it out with you and see what you thought about it. Okay, yeah, some people obviously in favor of it. Yeah, most watched video of the World Economic Forum ever. 248,000 views. Calls out the World Economic Forum in Davos for trying to enslave the world. Yeah, it's crazy to bring this to the doorstep of the people that you're calling out. Like that, regardless of if you like the guy or you agree with his policies, that's got to take some balls. Like some serious cojones. This maybe is an interesting take. I liked Javier Milei's speech, but I doubt his main message came across as a devastating rebuke to those who were present, contrary to what many are claiming. Okay. Many at the World Economic Forum believe that they like free enterprise and even say they are fine with capitalism. They just want it directed towards a particular purpose. They are corporatists of a particular sort, not communists or old-fashioned socialists. Huh. So he's saying, like, okay, all of these people at the event have convinced themselves that they like free enterprise and they're fine with capitalism. But then he goes on to say that these people want it directed to one place over another, right? We see that in Canada, right? We say like, oh, we want people to be entrepreneurs. We want people to grow businesses, but we're only going to provide helpful funding to green technologies and things that, for the moment, align with our narratives and the things that we're trying to push to get votes, right? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm all for developing more clean tech. I wonder if we should be investing as heavily in it as we are as a nation. That's another story for another day, though. For this reason, I personally would have liked Milei to elaborate more on the implications of the idea of freedom for issues like medical freedom, pandemic management, censorship, educational choice, the freedom of association, and the right of self-defense, and the rights of the people against the administrative state. These are the main battles we in the US, plus the Commonwealth countries and all of Europe, face today. This is the main battle of our times. I definitely see this, the battle of the people against the administrative state, right? Like, we see so much bloat. So much bloat in the growth of the public service, growing debt as a result of that, right? Like, here's I had this up from before when I was just looking it up, but like this is something that I covered last year. But just like the growth in federal employees, a 40% growth since 2015. That's in federal employees, and employees make up less of the workers than consultants do in many cases, right? In terms of average spend on those employees. So that's pretty wild. Soraya says something just doesn't seem right about them allowing this speech to happen. These people do not take risks such as this. His views were known beforehand. I like what he's saying, but why? Yeah, I mean, like that's definitely a view I can understand from somebody who maybe believes to their core that the World Economic Forum is a group of people that are dead set on one specific thing and one idea taking hold over the entire world, right? Like, why would you let this guy come and talk? Nobody trusts you. So now some people aren't going to trust this guy, Millet, just because he was on that stage and they let him be on the stage. So I can see how some people might be skeptical, but who knows? Like, I don't know if I don't think the World Economic Forum is some evil overlord body pulling all the strings on the world. I think it's a group of potentially well-meaning, I wouldn't say maybe not well-meaning, but not to their core evil people that are trying to help the world and trying to say, oh, we need to do these things to save the earth and act in a socially just way. I just think maybe they've strayed from what's actually going to serve people. But what do I know? I'm just reading this stuff and giving you my hot takes as I go along. That's Hansel. He's so hot right now. Okay. Yeah, a lot of people just like linking to it. Wow. Okay, so lots of different takes. Lots of different takes here. Okay, let's take a second. Do you have any thoughts about this before we move on to another story? I got like 5 more tabs open. That was the chief one for the night. 5 more tabs open of things that I think are worth talking about, and hopefully you'll want to talk about them with me. I got Eric saying, socialism is attractive and means well, but gets hijacked when top dogs get comfortable and make policy. Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, the overall ethos of like, let's make sure everyone has enough to make ends meet. Let's help people. Let's have a social safety net so that people, when they fall on their ass, can get back on their feet, right? We want to help them back up. I think that's a healthy thing for a society to think and feel. Help your neighbor, do these things. I just think it's a policy that's so easily co-opted by people who that sort of wholesome neighborly vibe isn't their intent, right? I think it often devolves into oligarchic situations where people use this system that is well-meaning, perhaps, to grab up more power for themselves, more money, in unjust ways, right? So I think I agree with you there, Eric. Samuel says, "Can you play the Strickland press conference? That's how people feel." Who's Strickland? Oh, is that like the fighter, Sean Strickland? Let me see. Maybe I'm gonna get demonetized for this. This guy has some takes. I saw him on the Theo Vaughn podcast. That's actually what this merch is from, Theo Vaughn. Sean Strickland press conference. Is that recent, Samuel? 2 hours ago. Oh, wow. Okay. So it's like talking about Canada specifically. Sean Strickland. Obviously, this is the UFC fighter. Let's check it out. I don't know what this is going to be all about. So, but let me see. I'm not a huge UFC fan. I've caught a couple fights. It's not something I've dove into a ton though.
Ovation. What does it feel like to be a hero to these people? You know, man. Now let me tell you guys something.
Canada great again, he says on his shirt.
And this is what the media doesn't understand when it comes to me and you guys and Australian fans. Let me tell you guys something.
In Canada, there's Sportsnet.
You guys don't care about me fighting. Yeah, me and Dreykus, we're going to have a death match. Someone's going to get their hand raised. Someone should get their hand raised. But when have you ever seen a UFC champion, George St. Pierre, or anybody else stick up for you fucking guys? I fucking do it. I do it. I am not chasing the Chinese check mark of Nike. I don't give a about that. I care about you guys. I care about you guys being free. I care about you guys having freedom of speech. I give a fuck about you guys. And I'll tell you what, you guys are fucking awesome, and I cannot wait for me and this man to fucking go to war for you fucking guys. Let's go.
Okay. Very, very, very passionate, Sean Strickland. That's wild. I don't know if it like maybe people are putting the Trudeau message into it a little bit more. He just says, I care about you guys. I care about your freedom. I care about freedom of speech. Obviously, like that's kind of in line with a lot of the criticisms of Trudeau. But yeah, what a clip. What a clip. Thanks for that. I think it was Eric brought it up. Okay. Yeah, so that's wild. Maybe that is how people really feel, is just want to yell about it a little bit, like Sean Strickland. Oh, there was a spicier rant as well. This is from Getting Cereal. It says there's a spicier rant as well. Where is it? I'm seeing the same one here. Yeah, I don't see anything very. Yeah, maybe I'll look for it in a minute. Let's get into this. Syfax, good to see you here. We just covered the Argentinian president's speech at the World Economic Forum. I thought it was pretty interesting. Yeah, I'll have to give a look for that, the other Sean Strickland one. I thought that was wild. Another topic that might be interesting to you is something that I know is controversial for some people, and some people think it's a federal or like a national treasure. This organization. Some people say we got to get rid of this. We gotta defund this. We gotta make sure it doesn't exist anymore. This is what some people are saying. Like I said, other people love this thing, and there's tons of people with opinions in the middle, all of which I respect. There's been a lot of talk about the CBC's mandate being renewed, right? What is the CBC doing? What do we do? What is the point of it? What is the point of it? A lot of people who don't like the CBC would say it's supposed to be the mouthpiece for the government, right? I don't fully buy into that. Like, I think that there are good quality, honest journalists at the CBC. I think some of it tends to be very left-leaning and very beholden to a certain narrative, right? Like, I'll give you that 100%. It's left-leaning. That's fine. But a lot of people think that it should be torn down. I just wanted to take a quick scan of this. News media is in crisis. Policy responses aren't helping it with all the Facebook stuff that went down. Actually, let me pull up my annotator so I can draw all over this. The senior CBC executive has written for this news site, this is the hub, in favor of a new mandate that clarifies its functions and purposes and how it should interact with the private sector. Okay, how much funding should go to Anglophone and Francophones? Okay. A lot of governments have failed to tell people what the CBC is even for, what it should be for. Starting point for review, CBC must go further. Do we still need the CBC? What is the CBC? Do we still need it? CBC, the initial policy rationale for the CBC was what economists refer to as market failure. The basic idea was that the market alone wouldn't bring radio and then television broadcasting to sparsely populated parts of the country because of a combination of market size and technological limits, precluded the private sector from doing so profitably. I'll give them that. That sounds fair. like we need, or small communities aren't going to have news that's built for them unless it's subsidized by something, by the government, right? Like who else is going to subsidize it? If you have such a small market of people, it can't be incredibly profitable to serve them, so there wouldn't be any service to them, right? So I could understand that argument. This is a textbook case of the state correcting for a market failure and therefore a justifiable instance of the government intervention, even according to neoclassical economic thinking. But this intervention is rarely revisited, and we just keep on going with it, even though things have changed. Nothing is so permanent than a temporary government program. That's pretty funny. That's wild. So the argument is that they're making is that a lot of things have changed, and maybe it shouldn't be have the same mandate as it did back then, or maybe it's less useful. Recently wrote, a publicly funded commercial news and entertainment organization is what Peter Menzies said. CBC Television is 14 owned and operated stations. Yeah, but they're not doing as well. Their market share is falling. But now there's tons and tons and tons and tons of content. Like user-generated content is the new meta. What are you watching right now, right? So fewer and fewer people are watching it. Anyone with a cell phone and a voice can effectively have a podcast. We're awash with them. What, therefore, is the public policy rationale to dedicate scarce public resources for the CBC to produce 142 separate podcasts? That's wild. I think that there is a use for the CBC. I love a lot of the programs, like especially CBC radio programs. They have a place in my heart, like listening to Quirks and Quarks and what is that one that used to have Carol Off and what is it? This is no, it's not this or that. What is that main like news one that they have in the evenings that sort of take different stories and do sort of podcast style? And maybe you can remind me what it's called. About 142 separate podcasts. You got to be kidding me. Okay. At the present, there isn't a market basis for the production of news at the local level, particularly in smaller markets. I'll agree with that. There are two problems with it, though. Only 40 cities and communities, most of which are the big cities. So they're not doing what they say they're doing, these smaller markets, which is where there should be a little bit more funding, because otherwise there wouldn't be local news existing there. They did add some more to smaller markets. And so here they're saying the CBC's local coverage isn't a public good. Instead, it's focused on niche issues and perspectives that may be interesting and even worthy of attention, but don't fill the informational void about town council debates. So he's saying the content that is covered seems to be serving a certain narrative rather than actually helping the people in that local community, the reason that it's supposed to exist. So that's wild. I just thought I'd bring that up. Like, what do you think that the CBC should be used for? Should it exist? Or maybe now with the internet, like you can reach more people and independent sort of media. There's probably a lot of people in small towns watching this video right now. Of course, I'm not covering the niche subjects of your community. That's something that I think that there still deserves to be some government funding for. But at the very least, there's Canadian content that you're able to consume. So that's pretty wild. Here's another story. This is one that relates to what we talked about on the channel yesterday. I guess I can take this off. Talking about the international student issue and the profitability of the universities and colleges. Watch that video if you haven't already done so. It's the most recent one on the channel. I think it's some interesting stuff, some misaligned incentives there. But now, I made this point in previous videos, not the one yesterday. It seems like maybe the demand for people to come to Canada, maybe that's going to actually fall off, right? Maybe that's not going to be there forever. Regardless of if the government implements a international student cap, they could still be in some hot water for immigration, which could be a big problem for them, right? We don't have like Canada's not affordable right now, largely leading to a low birth rate. And if we don't fill up that population Ponzi, well, then that could be a bad situation for the CPP, for OAS, Guaranteed Income Supplement, all these things that are continuously funded by the Canadian population. If we experience population shrinkage, it happens sometimes when it's cold. If we experience that, then that's going to be challenging for those programs to continue to exist in their current form. Okay, but here, some international students say they got a reality check and regret choosing Canada to further their education. I wonder if this narrative will spread and we'll see this become more of an issue more quickly. Some students who travel across the world to pursue their studies here in Canada are having second thoughts. Let me zoom in actually so you can see it a little bit better. Okay, there's a clip.
Is this what you imagined Canada would be?
Never. No one ever expected this to, like being in a home country and looking all over the world. People always think that something would be better, but after landing in certain countries, for example, Canada, people get to know the reality. The reality check is a must, I must say.
If you could go back, would you prefer a different country maybe?
Yeah, definitely. As per the recession period is going on, you very well know the rent, the grocery items, everything has been, the inflation has hit very hard. So right now I would say people should stay in their home country. They should not, for the current time period, I would not suggest anyone to move out of their home country, as the inflation has hit the whole world. Not just Canada, not just US, not just New Zealand. It's all over the world right now. So I would suggest everyone to stay at their home country and do something for your country over staying over there.
Yeah, definitely. That's why we have.
Wow, that's really interesting, right? Like we've got this guy saying, okay, let's pause this. Okay, maybe let's just finish it. Oh, thank you, thank you, Vane H, for the super chat. I appreciate the extra support for the channel. Every little bit helps when you're doing an independent channel like this, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Wait, now we're muted.
This situation has like made up our mind in the opposite direction than that.
If you were outside of Canada and you wanted to send your child abroad, would you send it to Canada?
Listen, even I want to run out of Canada. It's scam, man. Just paying a number of taxes. Nobody's going to repair the roads. In universities, these things happen. Farmers are angry. Other business owners are angry with government.
Wow. Okay. So I like the point of that one guy, the first guy that was on there, saying like, okay, I wouldn't leave your home country. He's not saying it's particularly Canada that's bad. It's the situation of, hey, things are getting expensive everywhere right now. Maybe you should stay where your family is and maybe you can support each other and lean on each other a little bit. I could understand that, right? Like imagine the cost of living in Canada right now. Imagine feeling that if you don't, like I'm sure there's lots of people even watching this right now that have left their families to go live somewhere else and sort of start a life on their own. And even if life has become proportionally as more, how am I saying this? Has become more expensive, proportionally the same in Canada versus where your home country. Well, I imagine it would probably be an easier transition to stay in the home country and deal with that increased costs, right? That's wild. No one ever expected this. The recession happening in Canada, inflation has hit very hard. Miller said that the system has gotten out of control with 800,000 students coming in last year. Kretchen said that people should be more realistic and that Canada is a land of opportunity. Canada is doing better than everybody else, he said in an interview with CTV News. That sounds like a line out of Christopher Freeland's book. Kretchen saying, hey, look how good Canada is doing. Doesn't that make you feel better, Canadians who can't make ends meet? That's wild. Hey, Thunder Duck. Wow, thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it. Keep up the great work, and thanks for all you do, Russell. Thunder Duck, thank you. You are the man. You are the person. I guess I can't assume gender from Thunder Duck. You are the man. You are the woman. You are the person. Thank you very much. That's awesome. Great seeing you here and supporting the channel. Love doing these live streams whenever I can. The luxury tonight is that the Leafs game wasn't at 7 p.m. It's actually at 9 p.m. Eastern because they're in Calgary. So bonus stream. Look at that. And then I'm going to go watch it after this. So I thought that was interesting. I use this sometimes, Canada, r/Canada, to see what people are talking about. Okay, now let's talk some economics, right? Let's talk about the state of things. Right now, it seems like we're at a pivot point where nobody knows where we're going to go, right? A lot of people feel like, okay, we might be getting to the end of interest rates increasing. Interest rates increasing, we might be getting to the end of it. We might be getting to a pivot point, right? Everyone's looking for a pivot point. When do the central banks, Federal Reserve, Bank of Canada, when do they pivot from a rate hike environment to a rate cut environment? A rate cut environment means a lot of things, right? Number one, it means that people can borrow more cheaply, right? That means businesses expand more rapidly, and generally people feel a little more wealthy when there's lower interest rates. The counter argument to it is, hey, got to be careful with lowering interest rates. It's going to create inflation from prolonged growth, right? Now, we haven't really seen low interest rates as of late without at the same time mass printing of money. So we'll see. Maybe lower interest rates, maybe it'll have an impact without as much inflation. The other thing that happens if you start lowering interest rates is house prices are going to go up, right? People can afford to borrow more. They can qualify for more mortgages. So I know that's something that some people are considering. But a lot of people don't know right now, are we going to see interest rates increase given some inflation data that's come in rather hot, or are we going to see interest rates decrease, this pivot that we've been talking about? This is something that's especially important to me right now. I'm in the process of hopefully trying to move into a new home. So trying to figure that out right now. You guys are the first ones to hear that. Even probably some of my closest friends don't know that yet. So good to see you on the stream. You get all of the little life updates. But something that I'm especially considering and thinking about right now, which way are interest rates going to go? Let's take a look at this. This guy, I'll flip over. This guy says the longer the Bank of Canada waits to cut rates, the harder they'll fall. So he's saying, Bank of Canada, you better freaking increase interest rates or else we're going to enter a major recession. That's what he thinks. If we keep on raising interest rates, nobody's going to be able to afford anything. Businesses are going to slow down. We're going to increase our joblessness rate. So that's my assumption of what he's going to say. Let's see what he actually says.
Bay Street economist David Rosenberg is the founder and president of Rosenberg Research, and he'll be sticking around with us through the half hour. David, it's always nice to have you with us.
Thank you, sir.
Time.
Great.
Well, you'd been pretty cautious, I know, in late 2023 on what might happen to Canada's economy this year. What's your current assessment of what's happening?
Well, really a lot more of the same. And when you're taking a look at 2023, the big story is the wide divide between economic activity and what's happening on population growth. So, you know, you mentioned it, population growth of 3%, real GDP year over year 0.5. So do the math. You're talking about real per capita economic activity, negative 2.5. So unbeknownst to most people, perhaps the biggest bulls on the stock market, maybe the Bay in Canada, is that the recession in Canada is probably already starting.
There's a point. He's making the point that I've made for the past couple of months, right? Like this GDP growth that we still have in Canada is a lie, because when we're talking about real growth per capita, per person growth, well, the only reason we have any growth is because of the human stimulus, the human quantitative easing, the adding of people to our economy to consume more, create more, and sort of stimulate the economy. That's the only reason we're seeing any growth. So he's saying maybe we're already in this recession.
And I think it's going to accelerate through most of this year. That's the big story.
And we do have an interest rate decision later this month. It looks like most on Bay Street are not expecting any change this month. But as we move through the year, there is a growing expectation we'll see rate cuts. But it would seem to me that you would be more in the camp of seeing rate cuts sooner versus later. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, there's something called policy lags, and they work in both directions. And one of the reasons why this recession is going to accelerate in Canada is because we're still feeding off all that dramatic restraint that the Bank Canada put into the system. And I think that to a large extent, the Bank Canada is going to be compelled to take out, we're not even talking about providing stimulus. I mean, the Bank Canada could cut rates 150 basis points, and that would just basically get us towards a neutral. The economy here is fundamentally weak. It's probably, you know, one of the weakest economies in the G10. And so, you know, the focus is on inflation, which is a classic lagging indicator. Inflation is going to come down as demand lags supply. I think the Bank Canada, and frankly, not just the Bank Canada, most Bay Street economists I find very disappointing. Everybody focuses on the here and now. They can't see past the tip of their nose. The outlook for the economy, I think, is one of you know, recession. In recessions, inflation declines. I think that the central bank would be better off focusing interest rates on its outlook as opposed to what inflation is doing right now. We're going to get another print tomorrow. Headlines are going to be filled with what the CPI did. The CPI is reflecting things that happened over the course of the past 3, 6, 12 months. It's not a forward-looking indicator. That's my big problem, not just in Canada, but in the U.S. too. This prevailing focus on coincident and lagging indicators. And that's going to get us into trouble. And I think both central banks, the Bank Canada and the Fed, are going to be scrambling to cut rates aggressively, not eminently because they're like, I mean, they're like a deer in the headlights because they missed the inflation. They were all intransitory, and they made a mistake. They corrected that mistake in terms of inflation. Now the mistake's going to be made in terms of economic activity, and I'm saying that not just in Canada but in the U.S. too.
Wow, that's wild. That's wild what he's saying. Like, he's saying, okay, the Bank of Canada is terrified of inflation, right? They don't want to see a situation where they already have rates high, they lower rates a little bit and they see more inflation. Maybe we enter a period of stagflation, a stagnating economy while inflation happens at the same time. That would require some serious pain to solve. That's what the Bank of Canada is so worried about. Rosenberg here says, hey, that is not the way to be thinking. You're looking too much at the inflation as it is right now. You can see our economic growth and the way it's trending is trending poorly, right? It's trending down. So you should get out ahead of the ball, skate to where the puck's going, not to where it is, and start cutting rates now, right? He's saying that this is what they should have done like in 2021 when they started to see inflation tick up. They said, hey, this is transitory. It's going to be here today, gone tomorrow. They didn't raise rates slowly. To try to sort of tamper down that inflation. They didn't preempt it. They waited until inflation was going batshit crazy until they started increasing rates so extremely quickly, 100 basis point or like a full percentage point at one meeting, right? So he's saying, well, you need to be more forward-looking than how you acted in the past, which has gotten us into this mess.
Sometimes we hear a narrative that if central banks, and let's take ours just as an example, if they start to indicate that it is time to lower interest rates, that especially with our housing market, and we talked about some of the dynamics that have pushed up home prices in this country, that if there's all of a sudden a signal that rates are coming down, that's going to feed into the housing story, and then there's sort of these inflationary effects from that. What's your general take on that?
To me, that's a knee-jerk reaction, really. The Bank Canada is as restrictive currently on its monetary policy as was the case back in the John Crow era in the late 80s and early 90s. They'd have to cut rates a heck of a lot to kickstart house inflation in Canada again and housing activity. So right now, I mean, how does that factor in? We're going to, I mean, maybe is there going to be really speculative activity because the Bank Canada is only taking out the excessive monetary restraint? We're not even talking about, I mean, the first 150 basis points in Canada, and you can almost say 200 basis points in the U.S., is not even easing. It's not even stimulating. It's just taking interest rates back to a neutral level. So no, I sort of push back and take a look what are the banks doing on both sides of the border? They're boosting their loan loss provisioning. They're pulling back. Look at the credit numbers in Canada. Like, how are you going to get a speculative move up in home prices when the banks are pulling back on mortgage availability? So I sort of...
That's a wild point. Like, he's saying that banks are sort of preparing for bad situations. They're preparing for a situation where, okay, we need more loan loss provisions. We need to set aside more money in case some of these mortgages go sour. He's saying the Bank of Canada should be seeing this and saying, hey, that's not the sign of a growing economy. That's not a sign of economy where inflation is going to be an issue. That's the inverse, is what Rosenberg's saying, and they should get out ahead of it.
Like, maybe there'll be a knee-jerk reaction, I suppose, but will it be sustainable? No. I think that the housing story in Canada is in the process of rolling over, and that's going to continue, notwithstanding what the bank's going to do in that first 150 basis points. That is not stimulus, okay? That is just eradicating the excessive restraint.
Let me go sort of the other side of that, because there was a big bank conference recently, and a lot of the CEOs here in Canada said they feel okay, it sounded like, about this mortgage renewal process we're going to be going through over the next couple of years. But what's your assessment, for the sticker shock that some Canadians will get from dealing with these higher interest rates? How do you feel about what's going to actually happen in the housing market going forward, especially, I guess, if the recessionary concerns grow into something like notable job losses? Like,
right.
What does that mean for that market?
Well, look, we're going to really be stress testing that thesis, okay? Because it's one thing, for example, to be withstanding this gigantic wave of mortgage rollovers when you're creating jobs and when the unemployment rate is flat or going down. That's not the case anymore. We're going to be stress testing these mortgage rollovers in the context of rising unemployment. That, to me, the defining moment for the economy last year in Canada was this, okay? The labor force expanded by roughly 100,000. What was the employment increase? Barely more than 40,000. There is a huge gap between the labor force expansion and the jobs that were actually being created. What does that mean in layman terms? The unemployment rate's going up. And in fact, the unemployment rate in the past year has gone up almost a full percentage point. You look historically, by the time you're up about a percentage point year over year in the unemployment rate, guess what? The recession's already started. Each of the past 8 recessions, only one head fake in the mid-1970s. So what's going to happen with the lag, because this is how economics works, rising unemployment is going to cut into wage growth. The Bank of Canada stays on the sidelines, doesn't cut interest rates, but the servicing burden in terms of the interest payments out of income is going to become impaired just by the fact that a looser labor market is going to cut into wage growth. Okay, so that's really going to be the story this year. And especially the Bank of Canada, deer in the headlights, staying on hold.
So he talks about the labor market, right? He's saying, okay, we're not going to be in this world where there's a tight labor market, right? Where it's hard to find workers, it's hard to hire people. We have a labor shortage, that's a tight labor market. He's saying we're going to have a loose labor market. There's not going to be enough people to, or there's not going to be enough jobs for people, right? That's what he says there's starting to be evidence of. And that's a situation where probably you want to lower rates so that businesses expand, hire more people, reduce unemployment, right? Interesting.
As wage growth slows, unemployment goes up, and then they'll be scrambling to cut interest rates second half of the year. The longer they wait, the harder those rates are going to fall, John.
So we'll watch those trends. And then on the immigration front, which becomes a very political issue, you're looking at the numbers, and I think there's sort of a question on Bay Street about what level of immigration can Canada's economy withstand, essentially, without these other dynamics. Like, if there's not enough new housing being built, is this a challenge for the economy going forward? How do you view this storyline?
Well, a smart immigration policy, which we have not had in a long time, is an immigration policy, and I'm talking about excluding the social policy aspects. Got to make sure that the immigration coming in at least pays for itself. Like, basically, the people coming in, what jobs are they getting? So you're going to tell me that they're going to be employed in value-added manufacturing that's going to improve productivity, bring it on. If we're talking about bringing in construction workers, tradespeople, that could actually boost Canada's housing stock, I say bring it on. The problem, as I said before, there's nothing wrong with immigration. It's just not paying for itself. We have virtually flat GDP growth, 3% immigration. So the question is for the government, these people that are coming into the country, and we're not talking about refugees or the social aspect of it, okay? From a pure economic standpoint, the people that are coming in, what are they doing once they're here? Okay, because this is an unprecedented divide between what the economy is doing and what's happening on the population side. And the way that you actually measure a country's economic well-being is through real GDP or real gross domestic income per capita. And in Canada, it is decaying at an alarming rate.
A man cut from the same cloth. I don't know about his interest rate takes, but yeah, the GDP per capita is something I've harped on for months and months and months. Yeah, it seems something he says like, okay, like our GDP growth is a lot worse than you think because it's propped up by population. That's wild. The interesting thing is, as I framed this, some people, Rosenberg, think rates are going to come down or that they need to come down. And the Bank of Canada would be making a mistake if they didn't bring rates down, saying we're going to see higher job losses or more unemployment, maybe just like less job growth relative to population growth. We're going to see those types of situations where the Bank of Canada is going to get caught deer in the headlights style and not have lowered rates when they should have to slow down a hard landing, right? I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's true or not. Like, to me, so far, the Bank of Canada kind of has landed the plane softly as you can. And it hasn't scarred the economy too heavily. That doesn't make me forgive them for the absolutely gaping hole between the haves and have-nots in Canada that I think they exacerbated through the pandemic and the money printing. But like I said, okay, for one guy saying one thing, here's another guy who I believe is saying the opposite thing. Benjamin Tal, chief macro economist for CIBC, on interest rates, home prices, and the number one risk to the economy. What does Benjamin Tal think the number one risk to the economy is? I'm curious. Policy rate is a key focus. He says, the market is confident disinflation will continue with rate cuts expected to begin in the second quarter. What do you see as the future path? Oh, this is an interview. This is not what he's saying. This is the question for him. Okay. The market's right to assume that they're done raising interest rates. The only reason why GDP growth is still above zero is because the population... Oh, maybe I'm wrong in saying he has the opposite take. Maybe everyone just agrees here and there's no controversy. Let's see. In the U.S., the situation is different. The economy's strong. And both central banks are probably done hiking. When are they going to cut? To me, it seems like, okay, so Tal is saying they're going to wait longer. A lot of people are saying April is when the first rate cut's going to come. He says it's way too early. They're going to make sure that inflation is absolutely dead before they cut rates. They'd prefer to overshoot relative to undershoot, because if you overshoot, you can compensate by cutting interest rates. When you undershoot, you got to deal with inflation, and inflation is very difficult to deal with. This is exactly what Tiff Macklem is saying, what Carolyn Rogers is saying, the people at the Bank of Canada are saying, that, hey, maybe we should be lowering interest rates right now, like Rosenberg's saying, like Tal's saying, but we're kind of scared to do that because we don't want to see a situation like the 70s, like the 80s, where we experience a high amount of inflation, we raise rates to fight it, we see inflation start to tick down, and we think, okay, the storm's done. We'll lower rates a little bit. Boom, they see inflation again, double dip, right? Or I guess it wouldn't be called double dip, double peak inflation, right? Double dip recession, where they have to raise rates even further than the first time because they've lost the confidence of the market that they're actually going to deal with inflation and deal with bringing down inflation expectations. One of the reasons we've seen a rally in the bond market recently is the fact that the market's too optimistic about the Bank of Canada and the Fed cut prematurely. Okay, so he's saying, okay, the bond market which is one of the predictors of interest rates, right? The interest rates are largely tied to the Government of Canada bonds, 5-year bonds largely, is a good indicator for the direction. And he's saying the bond market has been increasing, meaning, hey, maybe they think that interest rates are going to go up. But I think what he's saying right now is just that this is a repricing of what they think the market's going to do. They think that the Fed and the Bank of Canada actually aren't going to cut rates as early as we think, which many people think is April. We see the Bank of Canada cutting in the second half of the year by 150. That would be a fast-paced rate. He's saying, second half of the year, they're going to cut by a percentage and a half, right? That's 150 basis points. Bring it, I think they're at 5 right now. They're going to bring it down to 3.5. Is that right? That seems low. Not low compared to 0.25 during the pandemic, though. And they're going to cut that in just 6 months, second half of the year. Continue to cut the first half of 2025. Okay. Interesting. So I guess we're going to have to see. We're going to have to see what happens. Again, this is something that I'm especially watching because I'm in a mortgage situation myself where I'm trying to figure out how to play this. I know you can't predict the future, but I'm trying to do my best. Okay, and we got Sean Strickland as the last tab. So that's most of what I wanted to cover today, folks. Thank you for being here. I'm not going to cut quite yet, because I always like to spend maybe just 5-10 minutes here at the end just chatting with you. What are you interested in? What am I not covering that you think I should cover? That's helpful to hear from you. Questions, anything like that before we call it. Because, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on, and I'm glad I had a chance to come here and chat with you all. Like I say, every single live stream, I hope you get to know me a little bit better and my personality, right? Streams are better for that. You kind of get to know the actual person, whereas I try to hone and chop up and edit all my videos. So I get to know you a little better in the chat, and you get to know me a little better. I think it works. Thanks, Pooter, and thanks, Mother Rat. Good to see you. Blah blah. It's horrible right now, but we think we'll get through it. Don 50 on, maybe Don Swan, maybe that's what they can keep rates for 2 quarters while changing policies to build homes, while halting immigration. That would decrease unemployment and create positive stimulus and confidence in the economy. Keep rates even, build more homes. That's another thing, like, because there's this inverse connection between, like, higher rates means it's harder for homes to be profitable to build, right? Developers don't make as much money when they can't borrow for as cheap. So some people say, hey, you got to cut rates so we can build more homes, but the cut rates also increase the price of homes. So I don't really know how to parse through that sort of multi-sided argument, you know? Cover international student scam. Eric, yeah, we've covered that a fair amount. Actually, my most recent video, watch it, everyone here, if you haven't already, from yesterday, covers that pretty heavily, and I think breaks it down pretty well. Barron family says, I told them I wanted to adjust my amortization period. They asked me how many years I wanted to add. 0. I cut it in half. Seems like most are adding longer terms to the amortization periods. Yeah, Barron, if you're in a position where you can reduce your amortization and still make the payments, that's awesome. Pay off your home more quickly. I think that obviously it's not always the best, like, optimized financial decision for everybody in terms of returns, but I think that having a paid off house has got to be very helpful mentally in terms of the risks that you can take in the rest of your life, right? You can try a career that might be even more profitable for you if you have a paid off home, because you're not worried about making that payment. It's not as hefty a payment. You can make less income in the short term to try to take a risk to make more. So that's awesome, Barron. I think a lot of people are doing these amortization extensions, like extending it 30, 35 years, 40 years, because that's all they can do. They're screwed, right? If you don't stretch out the amount of time to pay down your loan, as a result making the payments smaller, then a lot of people can't make the payments anymore, right? So they're kind of being forced into these longer amortizations that prop up the housing market, yes, but also make the banks more interest over the period of that loan, right? Because you're paying less principal on every payment. Brian C. says, hey, Russell, not many talk about the ban on foreign purchasers property purchasing. Hey, Russell. Not many talk about the ban on foreigners purchasing properties in Canada due up next January. Do you think the housing market dipping would have been partially propped up if they didn't ban? Maybe. Like, I have a hard time getting stats on like how many foreign purchasers are buying properties in Canada and like using it as a hedge against the currency of their own country or against like capital controls in their own country, right? A government not wanting you to move your money out of the country. Like, I think we see that a lot. Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna see that. Like, I imagine anyone who would have wanted to buy property probably were able to find loopholes through this temporary foreign purchasing ban, right? So that's my guess, is that maybe it wouldn't be as impactful as you might have thought, because they probably could have found loopholes in the system, but who knows? It's impossible to build up 1 million homes per year. Yeah, I tend to agree. Who knows? Thanks, Russell. Good job. Listen to the UFC thing. Yeah, I'll see if I can find it, Paul, because it sounds interesting. And Sean Strickland is a character. You can say a lot of things about that guy. You cannot say he's not entertaining. Mega Bean. Nice name. Do you think the media should be directly asking the Bank of Canada / Freeland about the per capita GDP growth? Yeah. Yep. Yep. There's my short answer for you, Mega Bean. I think that they absolutely should be talking about that. But it's a sore spot, right? It's a sore spot because for a long time, not just during this current Liberal government, for a long time, Canada hasn't been great at increasing its economy through increases of productivity, right? Better manufacturing, more efficient manufacturing, the growth of more businesses, more profitable businesses, investing in new and emerging industries that grow the pie, right? We've been real shit at that over a long time. So it's a sore spot for everybody, conservatives, liberals, everyone. I think they should be talking about it, though. They should be talking about it. Yeah, we all spend your money. Yeah, well, interesting stuff. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I appreciate you being here. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Like I said, love getting to hang with you guys. I am going to go and maybe grab a drink, and I think I'm going to watch the Leafs game starting at 9 p.m. Eastern. They've lost 4 in a row. The boys in blue. Let's hope we can get out of this. If we can't beat the Flames, sorry to any of my Calgary friends out there. I got family in Calgary. But not the best hockey team this year. Not the best hockey team. Looking back on that team with Matthew Tkachuk and Johnny Gaudreau and that playoff series with Edmonton, you thought they're going to be amazing for years. Not in the cards. Not in the cards. Sorry about it. I wish the best for the Flames. Not tonight, though. Let's get it. All right. Thanks, you guys, for hanging out with me. No, there's really no schedule to these streams. Maybe that's something that would help people be able to tune in more regularly, but these days I don't know what's happening with my evenings and when I'm going to be able to, so keep your eyes open. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I do these lives. That's the best way to actually get in here, because I'm not on a schedule. Hit the notification bell, it'll let you know. It'll also ping you when I post a new video. You can ignore that if you're only looking for the live streams, or you can check that out too. But if you like these live streams, that's the best way to get notified directly when I go live. So I appreciate you doing that, and hopefully you've enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all again soon. Have a great evening. If I don't talk to you before the end of the week, which I probably won't, have a great weekend as well. Wishing you and your families all the best. You guys rock. We'll talk to you later.